contemporary social landscape of Pakistan, it is plagued by a plethora of issues. One of these is the ineffectiveness of educational reforms. In today's episode of Ravi Podcast, this is Umar Danish.
And I am Daniyal Ishfaq.
And we have with us our esteemed guest, the Director of Strategy and Business Development at the City School Central Region, Ms. Attiya. Today, we want to discuss how the educational reforms in Pakistan have been ineffective along the last few decades, right? And along those lines then, our first question to Ms. Attiya would be that what do you think is the reason behind the ineffectiveness of these educational reforms?
So Umar, first we have to be very clear about what educational reforms you're talking about. From where I'm sitting, we hear the term educational reforms all the time, and we've been hearing it since perhaps the inception of Pakistan back in 1947. But I don't think anyone has a clue as to what these educational reforms are. We have a crisis, we all know that. A large majority of our population in Pakistan is illiterate. There are far too many kids out of school, even at the primary level, let alone the secondary and higher levels. And the reforms are not addressing the core of the issue.
Right, and what do you think is at the core of it?
Okay, so obviously, whenever you talk about any reform in Pakistan, the heart of the issue is the economy. We're always told that we cannot execute any reforms because we don't have a strong economy, and the priorities are, we all know what they are, defense and other things. So the core of the issue is that you have a population that's needy, and you have parents who have a choice whether they want to send their, so anywhere else in the world you don't have a choice. The minute your kid turns 5 or 6, if they're not in school, the parents can be held accountable to the government for it.
Right.
Unfortunately, in Pakistan, that's at the core of the issue. Parents have a choice. Should they send their kids to school, or should they at the age of 5 put their kids into apprenticeship in some workshop or some brick kiln or what have you?
So, do you think making primary education a compulsory thing in Pakistan would help this cause?
It already is. It already is mandatory and compulsory. So the issue is not the law. So I think that when we talk about reform, we actually have to analyze what the law is. And frankly, even where the laws are right now, they would to a large extent address the issue that we have. The issue is the implementation of the law. How can you support parents who cannot afford to send their children to school, even the almost free government schools, because of the fact that they perhaps need the children to be bringing in an income, or they simply don't have the money or the concern to buy even basic uniforms, etc. Where do you see successful models of government or charity schools? The successful model is when that school is able to provide food for those children. So the children are going to school and getting one meal, so that brings relief for the parents, that they don't have to provide that one meal to the kids. Or at the very least, they're getting uniforms from the school, so the parents don't have to spend any extra money on anything. They know that they're sending their kid to school for free, and they don't have to spend anything. So they may divert their financial needs and send the kid to school.
Just to add up on that, I've recently heard that there is actually budget allocated to the provision of uniform and books, etc. to these children. Then do you think that there is an issue with the way it is spent in the government sector as well? Because I think there's like a lot of corruption, etc. that happens, because a lot of the kids who deserve these basic supplementary things don't really receive them.
Absolutely. I think the heart of the issue is, yes, like I said, that the laws aren't bad. So on paper there's a provision, school is compulsory at the primary level. Like you said, that they're meant to provide books, uniform, and even perhaps a meal, etc. But look at the size of our population and then look at the percentage of the budget that's allocated to education. How can it be physically possible? And then even the budget allocated is not always given because of the amount of debt recycling going on. The amount of budget that is allocated is not given to for the provision of education. So I think that it's a drop in the ocean. The actual funding that's needed is huge. The population is huge. The population of out-of-school children is huge. And unfortunately, even what's required by law is not being implemented.
I think we can all agree upon that in Pakistan the issue has always been with the implementation of laws, and we don't necessarily have a problem with policymakers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that, another follow-up question: where do you stand on the idea of this whole single national curriculum that was a big debate in the past couple of years?
Dekhe, ideologically, I fully support and stand behind the single national curriculum. Anywhere in the world, you look at our neighbor India, they have no concept of any international examinations such as Cambridge or anything else.
Yeah.
They prefer their local board because the quality and competitiveness of that local board is so high that these children are coming out and then the quality of the universities they have is so high that they're not even looking to go abroad. In some cases, before this we were talking about first choice universities. In many cases, Indian universities are their first choice, and if they don't get into those, then they think of going abroad.
Yes, because a friend of mine once told me that the people that IIT generally rejects end up going to MIT, which is a top university of the world.
So that absolutely. So that shows you the caliber of not only their universities but also the system that's churning out these students to be competitive for these universities. So ideologically, the idea of a single national curriculum where everyone has an equal footing and is being provided a curriculum that is holistic, that is creating individuals that are ready for the country they live in and as global citizens. However, unfortunately, the quality and standard of our local curriculum is so poor that the single national curriculum, the way it was envisaged and the way it was rolled out, was very short-sighted and premature for Pakistan. So you had a population that was already very stratified, where you had private schools filling a gap, a very serious, severe gap, and providing education to a vast majority of Pakistanis. And I'm not just talking about the few lakh OA level kids. I am talking about all the private schools that are even affiliated with local board. And then you had the millions in the government schools. Now rolling out a single national curriculum meant that you're bringing, even where the denominator was high in, for instance, private schools, you're bringing it to a level where you shouldn't, because what at least the schools and the students etc. that were doing well should have been left to that. Now what we were told at the time when it was rolled out was that we will not set a ceiling, we'll only set a baseline. So as long as the schools are ticking the baseline, then there's no problem with what extra they're doing. But actually in implementation, and we were fine with that. So like I said, ideologically, the idea of a single national curriculum is something that as a country, as a nation, for nation building, we need to move towards. But unfortunately, in the way it was implemented was that we were forced to, adhere to certain curricular concepts that were by now alien to the market that the private schools were catering to. So we thought that that was bringing our level down rather than us, integrating with the larger population of Pakistan.
So you think that instead of elevating the standards of what the government kids were studying, they essentially just brought down the kind of level that we had in our private education sector, right?
They tried to, and the reason for that was because of the time in which they wanted to implement it. A curriculum is not something that happens overnight. A curriculum is a living document. It takes years and years for it to sort of be integrated, implemented, and then starts showing results. So what we were urging the government to do at the time was that bring it in, but do a very slow phase-wise approach where you first bring it up at your local school levels. You ask us to adhere to certain curriculum objectives which we can, while still delivering whatever we are delivering according to international standards, and then hopefully a few years down the line we would have seen the gap close. Because like I said, that you can't finish off decades and decades of stratification which no one supports, not me as an educationist, but you can't fill that gap of decades in a year. But as is the case with politics and governments who feel that they have very short term in power and they want quick results, they did it in a very roughshod manner, and it crashed.
Yeah. So you think actually SNC, ideologically it was a good thing, but then at the end of the day it was a panic button that the government hit because they didn't know where to go with the education sector.
Yeah, I think it was a great thing, but they had the panic button on from day one.
Also because I think in Pakistan, if we see just before now, we were talking about the educational reforms themselves, and it went down to economy. And now we are talking about the single national curriculum. It went down to politics, how each government has a re-election incentive. Absolutely. So I think in Pakistan, the entire issue themselves, they just boil down to macro issues at large scale level. Yep. Yeah. So I think that the major issue that we're facing is not essentially amongst the people. It is amongst this certain elite class that's ruling us, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think the issue is that the people of Pakistan are never the priority for the decision makers. They always take a very short term sort of view where they look for personal gain. Contrast to, I gave you the example of India, but look at what happened in Bangladesh. Why did a student movement manage to topple a dictatorship of 17 years? Because those students came out of a system that had institutions built over decades that were not going to sort of back down. And we haven't seen a single movement of this nature in Pakistan successfully survive because unfortunately we don't have institutions like that, because those have never been allowed to develop in our country.
Yes, because I think we're primarily missing the values that need to be instilled in our children, and instead just focusing on how in the short term we can retrieve the maximum benefit from these kids and harvest them as the products of our society.
But I think also at the end of the day it boils down to the type of state that Pakistan is. There are certain forces, of course, it will become controversial if I talk about it. But I think that at the end of the day, it's about the type of state that we have developed into in the past couple of years.
I mean, I'm a history student, so I think it's important to realize that the type of state that we are is not because one fine day in 1947, from one day to the next, we became that type of state. I think giving it historical context, Northwest India, which is present-day Pakistan, was a bulwark for their effort in the Afghan war for the British. And they recruited their army, their officer corps from Northwest India. So while they let democratic forces flourish, develop in the rest of India, which was also under British rule, they ruled Northwest India very differently. So it was ruled with a view of creating a class that would remain supportive, passive, and quiet for their war effort in Afghanistan, because these areas were critical to their supply routes to their sort of general war effort. So you had this military landed elite alliance form over a century of colonial rule that wasn't going to go away after 1947. So that same class that was so used to this, being beneficiaries of this system, have continued. And unfortunately, that entire region became, or fortunately for us, that entire region became a country. And now that country has the nature that we see it has.
So, so what you're suggesting is that these views were caused over us over like a long period of time. So it's not just essentially what happened after 1947, but it's just the propagation of the effect of something that happened like much longer ago, right?
It was like the way this entire region functioned. It functioned as a military state.
Right.
You didn't have, like I said, you didn't have the same local governance, the same sort of democratic spirit that you had in East India, that you had in South India. So Bangladesh, India today have those same sort of institutions that were even allowed to develop in their nascent stages under British rule. But Northwest India always remained at the mercy of the imperial elite, the landed elite, and the military elite.
Yeah, so I think then it all comes down to the sort of identity crisis that we as a Pakistani citizen are currently going through, because there is no single that one thing that binds all of the citizens together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is why there's so much stratification. Nobody thinks, I mean, yes, on 14th August we all pull out our flags and, but actually we all subscribe more to our individual identities, be it a Punjabi identity or a Gujar identity or some other even more local identity. But we subscribe less to being Pakistanis. Whereas if you go to Iran, they are a nation. So today they can take on any country in the world and eyeball it. But because we have so much self-doubt as a nation, we don't have the wherewithal to do that.
I think, but this is slowly changing, and I think we're maybe destined to become a better state over time, primarily because we've seen the younger generation, especially as the rise of social media itself. I think people are now becoming more aware of what the shortcomings of our society are, and at least to some level, I think they're trying to overcome it, right?
I agree with you and disagree with you in the sense that yes, the younger generation or Gen Z is becoming more aware with the exposure to social media, etc. But don't forget that sitting here, we live in a bubble where a very small percentage of Pakistan. What's going on in the rest of the country, it's hard to say. But having said that, yes, I agree with you. Social media has been a game changer. And you see everybody today on TikTok, and it's a beast that's impossible to control. And so even people who may not be educated now have an awareness that we didn't have a couple of decades ago. So there is hope, certainly, and we should always maintain that hope. But I think that it does, I mean, and now today I feel that the Bangladesh example has also given us that sort of pathway that we can have a say if we stand our ground and fight for it.
I think the problem here is that the people of Bangladesh actually had something to stand up for. The problem with social media, as Umar mentioned, is that sure, it can help you in gaining that sort of clout, but then at the end of the day, I am very privileged to say that I have some sort of information that I can use to actually see what is really happening, but then there are a lot of uninformed citizens that we have generated with this beast called social media.
Exactly. Very uninformed citizens who, sadly, some of the largest movements in Pakistan in recent history have been religious extremist right-wing movements. So, you have, since we're on the subject of education, there was a whole cadre of children in madrasas who were being radicalized, militarized because of that huge gap in education, because of that huge gap in the absence of schooling, or in the absence, you had these religious movements with money coming to these parents and saying, give us your kids, we'll provide for the rest of your family, and offering them financial benefits in exchange for radicalizing these kids. So yes, you're right, the social media has been a double-edged sword, that there's all sorts of mindsets and information out there.
Like, coming on to the idea of madrasas, do you think it's also then the fault of education systems as a whole, because they failed to provide or filled in the gap that the whole appeal of these madrasas filled in, that we are going to teach your children, you just have to send us some minimal amount of money and we'll take care of them?
Absolutely. And again, I want to go a little bit back in history. In Mughal times and beyond, we had an extremely elaborate, very advanced education system, which was our madrasa system. And you were at the cutting edge globally of science, literature, poetry, astronomy, even physics. We didn't look outward, we didn't look to compete. It was other people that wanted to break into our system and get, we were wealthy, we were patrons of, like I said, medicine, art, and all the fields. What the British realized when they took over was that to successfully defeat us and to retain control, the first thing they had to do was to break down our education system, which is what they systematically did. So the fact that they destroyed our local madrasa system and replaced it with this sort of British system that only the elite had access to, and suddenly the masses were deprived of it, led to where we are today. And like I said, that was also again the difference between Northwest India and the rest of India. And then today we are in a place where we are now trying to emulate the Western model of education, which is the schooling system, which is fine. We can't go back in time.
Exactly.
But because it's inadequate and of a low standard, of course the madrasa system, which has survived in whatever misshapen form it has, will try and capitalize on this. And you saw that in Swat, where you had that radio mullah who radicalized an entire population and managed to take over an entire state. So you had a state within a state in Swat for a while, until with a lot of difficulty the army was able to take it back.
So then I think at the end of the day, there's a certain cycle that we all experience in Pakistan. For 20 to 30 years, there will be some sort of stabilization within the country or within the economy. But then again, after 10 years is an economic downturn, and this is the point where we start to discuss these sort of issues. So then do you think the problem then lies with the foundational basis that we laid in the start of this country? Or do you think these problems evolve over time and their root causes are something that is different?
Look, I don't think there's ever, if you look at post-colonial states across the world, most of them, if not all, a large majority of them had even worse problems than we did. But today they're thriving states. They've managed to overcome all their issues, and they've managed to sort of, so like I said, that there was something structurally left incorrect in us, which unfortunately we haven't been able to shake off. And we've had an extremely selfish, inward-looking elite that would rather sort of think of their own personal benefit instead of looking outward and actually building the foundations which we can take forward and get out of this cycle that you spoke about.
I think then the difference between the other colonialist states that were previously colonized and Pakistan and India is primarily the fact that there was a division in here. So do you think that it was a division of Pakistan and India that primarily resulted in all of these issues? Because all of the other states that we've seen were colonialized, and then they were released by the Britain after like a certain period of time. I think they had like still similar ideologies and their beliefs were still the same. I feel so that the primary reason the beliefs of the people of subcontinent were distilled were maybe because of the division. So do you think it has something to do with the way our beliefs are shaped?
Again, like I said, I mean, a lot of, look at Africa. You've literally got straight lines on a map because that arbitrary division took place there as well. That arbitrary division took place in many post-colonial states where literally the colonial rulers just sat down and made lines and divided up the spoils. So I don't think it was partition per se, but it was the thought process behind it. Just like I told you that they systematically broke down our madrasa system. If you look at if you look at sectarian violence, I mean, I can't say from any historical sources, but any history that I've read tells you that there was virtually little to no interreligious or intersect violence until British rule. Because again, they played up these differences between these sects and gave themselves sort of that power through divide and rule. So I think that mindset then over decades prevailed, and instead of fighting who we should have been fighting, which was our colonial masters, we kept fighting amongst ourselves. Right. So I think it's that mindset that has also prevailed, and which is why today we can't come together. I mean, people are overjoyed about Arshad Nadeem. He won the Olympic gold medal, and everyone's talking about how he, had no support from the government in anything that he did. But we, like you said, in the early 90s, we had a boxer called Shah who attended his first international tournament without shoes, and he was made fun of because the government didn't even have the wherewithal to provide him with shoes, and he won, I think, not a gold but a silver, and he had to sell it eventually, and he was a construction worker discovered in the middle of nowhere. Today, instead of being in Pakistan, he's training children in Japan. So we don't have a sense of own. We don't have a sense of ownership. We are only, and then if the elite is going to be like that, or if the ruling class is going to be like that, then everyone's going to be like that. Everyone's going to think of, even the people coming up from the bottom are going to be like that. You'll have one ED, but you'll have a million people who are only interested in serving themselves.
I think some way in the past we have lost our sense of identity, whereby for a certain amount of time these all things seem good to us, like the example of Arshad Nadeem, but then at the end of the day they are not enough to last, let's say, decades or even more.
You will never produce Arshad Nadeems until you create a system of supporting athletics. I mean, the same thing that we talked about for education, the laws, the implementation, the reform. I'm sure the laws for sports are amazing. If you open the law books, there's probably a whole system that's stellar, and you can't improve even a single thing in it. But what's happening on paper?
And there's like so many. And there's like so many institutions as well, the Pakistan Sports Center, etc., etc. They've formed like all ministries, etc. for that. Yeah. But the only thing at the end of the day they'll focus as cricket, which will go for, will lose, will come back.
Even cricket, what system do you have in cricket? What domestic first class, etc. It's a broken, non-merit based sort of system that doesn't actually promote good success. I mean, look at what's happening across the world. these cricketers, they have a team of psychologists, they have a team of doctors who analyze each muscle in their body to see which muscle is performing suboptimally. And if you go to the National Cricket Academy, and if I was talking to their trainer, and if you go to the National Cricket Academy, they don't even have a proper gym. So what are you even doing for your most popular sport?
And that is the one that they are even like criticized for investing the most in. And even there we're lacking basic facilities. And I think the same effect is within education as well.
Absolutely.
Whether it's about attending Olympiads or any sort of tournaments whatsoever. I think we only go to like the Olympiad itself. We don't go to any of the follow-up tournaments to the Olympiads. There's like tournaments happening in Russia, in Japan, in Singapore. We don't attend most of that, and those are attended by private institutions that are then able to afford it for themselves.
So look at Jahanara Nabi. Everybody was talking about how a Pakistani girl swimmer made it to the Olympics, but nobody talks about how she, for the last so many years, was not in Pakistan. She had to be in Thailand, and she was training over there. I mean, so my national pride should not be in her citizenship. My national pride should be in the fact that my country supported her, gave her the facilities she needs, gave her the domestic competitive culture that she needs, gave her the entire system to take her to the level where she is able to compete. But she had to invest in herself, and suddenly, just because she has green passport, she's we're taking pride in Jahanara.
I think there's this common theme in all of the institutions of Pakistan, that is the idea that there is lack of meritocracy. Like coming back to the example of PCB, the reason that you get these so much reforms in, let's say, 1 or 2 years when there is a new chairman, I think that comes down to the reason that there is no proper structured way as to how you elect your chairman, and when the new chairman comes, they want to exercise their powers and they want to exert themselves upon other individuals that exist within the organization. So I think at the end of the day, the whole idea of meritocracy is missing in Pakistan as a country.
Absolutely, and anyone who tries to institute it gets taken out. So I have no names, but a couple of years ago, one of the chairmen decided to try and finish this and make the PCB into a more corporate organization. So he brought in a CEO, he brought in a CFO, and made this whole sort of very corporate structure. And he said, I'm going to take a step back and let the CEO, who is an internationally selected sort of person with credentials, to come in and run this organization. And I can tell you, because that gentleman approached us and other schools and said that we want to have we want to have a system for where we select children from the age of 12, so as they grow up they can come up the ranks and have proper cricketing, coaching and a basic level of education. So we said, sure, we'll provide them with the schooling, you guys provide them with the training. And he was trying to set up this whole structure that would have meant that by the time these kids are 16, 17, they are proper athletes psychologically, physically, and in terms of the actual sport they're playing. But of course, within 6 months, the chairman was changed because the government changed. Then a few months later, the CEO was fired, and that whole structure was done away with. That's just a microcosm of what happens in the rest of our country.
Then I think another issue that we face is that all of the success that we have, that we live for, is actually certain anomalies within the system, i.e. Arshad Nadeem himself. Absolutely. I think these are like anomalies, and I even felt ashamed putting up an Instagram story of him in Pakistan shirt. Absolutely. Because Pakistan's shirt was not what he won for. I think he won it for himself, because his village literally pooled in money to send him. I mean, I literally had goosebumps reading that fact. Yeah. How hard it would be, and how much the pressure he would have felt, because there is a certain pool of people that were investing money in him. Absolutely. And he had to show them some kind of progress. Absolutely. And despite that, he achieved so much.
Absolutely. So like I said, that we shouldn't just support our heroes because they happen to share the same nationality in us or by the coincidence of birth. we should have pride in our national heroes because our country made them into who they are.
Exactly.
Sadly, we can't say that. So yeah, that's the, like I said, the cricket, Arshad Nadeem, all of these things are examples of what the reality is in the rest of the country.
But then coming back to education, how do you think the OA level system and the IBDP program, etc., these are trying to cure the flaws within the education system in Pakistan, and how successfully do you think they've been doing it so far?
देखिए क्योर तो बिल्कुल नहीं है. एक आप इमेजिन करें कि एक बहुत ही डिजीज्ड बॉडी है और उसकी हम एक बाजू की सिम्टम्स को हम ट्रीट करें. सो व्हाट वी आर डूइंग इज दैट वी आर टू very cynically we're propagating a system. The worst way to look at it is we're propagating a system where again the beneficiaries of that system continue to remain sort of ahead of everybody else and continue to have better opportunities, better success, and continue the same cycle. Okay, that's a cynical view. The less cynical view is, which is probably where it is, somewhere in the middle, that in the absence of good government provided education, the private sector stepped in and sort of tried to plug a gap and provide opportunities to these children in the hope that they will, through their education, through their advancement, come and reform the system. So that's the best case way of looking at it, and that's the hope, that you have this entire ONA level and IB, etc., will produce citizens that will eventually want to come back and make a difference and give back. Now, but another equally important thing to talk about is that you have the very elite private school sector, then you have the government sector, but then you have this huge network, and I'm saying huge with the caveat that we are a large population, so when you say huge, it's all relative, of organizations such as CARE, such as Citizens Foundation, and several others that are educating thousands of children also, and trying to fill the gap. In their case, they are addressing the issues of that section of society that obviously that's completely alien to the private schools of the country. But these, I know, for instance, CARE educates thousands of students across Pakistan. Citizens Foundation has schools just like this one and are trying to sort of provide facilities and the same quality education that you have in private schools and so on. So I think that, as with everything else in Pakistan, we have certain citizens who fortunately have this sense of responsibility, who try to give back. And like I said, that's the hope with private schooling.
So it's still a far-fetched hope that we have, that we're training these kids who we're raising to have like certain values, and then we're expecting them to give back. But I think it's essentially the only hope that we have, right? But then with all of the issues that we've currently discussed, the economic issues, the political landscape of Pakistan, etc., everything, how do you then think that we can approach education if, let's say, all of these things, economic, political, etc., because these are essentially things beyond the control of like an average man, right? So how do you then think we can move towards these solutions to the education system in Pakistan?
With all these handicaps?
Yeah, with all these handicaps. I think it's quite a challenging question as well.
It's quite a challenging question, and there's no right or wrong answer, because you know what, I can only give you my opinion. My opinion is that we shouldn't, you had this concept of Danish schools, and then you had this concept of you constantly have these newfangled ideas.
Numashri Center for ACC.
ECC and single national curriculum.
Yeah.
Like everyone's tried to do their own thing in it. I think what I would do if I was in power was to just implement what's there first, you know. And don't forget that education is a provincial portfolio.
Yeah.
It's not a national portfolio since it was devolved. So every province should look at their primary level education first, look at the law and provide basic education to everybody. Focus on that first. Then, you know, provide better higher education to everybody. So I think that instead of trying to innovate and we're so far behind that at the very basic level, we need to implement the idea that education should be compulsory for every child and implement that. And then we can start adding the value addition stuff.
Do you then think that public-private partnership is something that the government needs to take a look upon?
Absolutely. देखिए पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप की ज़रूरत है ना, मतलब आइडियली तो गवर्नमेंट को हर चीज़ करनी चाहिए, बट सिंस वो नहीं करती तो पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप ही है. अब केयर को देखें, they've adopted thousands of government schools in Punjab, where they're actually running a government school with their curriculum, their teacher training, their books. So you already have a successful model. But as with everything in Pakistan, funding is a challenge. आपका जब आपने अपनी इकोनॉमी का इतना बेड़ा गर्क किया हुआ है और आप वो लोग जो इस तरह की चीज़ें कर सकते हैं, आप उनकी बिजनेसेस को ही नहीं चलने दे रहे, तो फिर आप उनसे पार्टनरशिप कैसे एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं? तो एक इकोसिस्टम को ठीक होना होता है फॉर एवरी पार्ट ऑफ इट टू वर्क.
सो देन फिर मेरे ख्याल से एजुकेशन तो एक इफ़ेक्ट है इन सारे प्रॉब्लम्स का जो हमें नज़र आ रहा है, और बिहाइंड द सीन्स प्रॉब्लम वही है जो शुरू से पाकिस्तान का रहा है, एंड वी हैवंट इवन ट्राइड टू फिक्स दैट.
अनफॉर्चुनेटली सबसे पहले आई थिंक एजुकेशन में जो सारे तोते की तरह कहते हैं कि सबसे पहले आप अपनी प्रायोरिटीज़ ठीक करें. एंड अगर आपका बजट है तो उसमें से जो आपने नाम का एजुकेशन को परसेंटेज दिया हुआ है, पहले आप उधर से शुरू करें. फिर आप देखें कि जी इसकी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन कहाँ हो रही है, कैसे हो रही है, फिर आप ये सारी ऑप्टिक्स की चीज़ें करें ना. एंड इसमें भी इवन इफ दे डू दिस, आई थिंक देयर इज़ अ लॉट ऑफ ऑप्टिक benefit to be gained for the government that says I am investing in education, you know.
Yeah. Also because I think the priorities of even the people here are messed up, because as soon as the Supreme Court gives a decision that they dislike, they then want to go ahead and storm a protest right outside the Supreme Court. But as for education etc., we don't have like any protests etc., that our children are not able to afford education, we need you to provide us with schools, with books etc. I think people just simply don't think about it enough.
But Umar, look at the situation now. Like if you are a person who's earning X amount, and your first priority will be to feed your family.
That's true.
And I mean, yes, of course education should be a priority, but again I feel child labor is a symptom, not the cause. Why is there child labor? Because you are not able to provide basic needs to a vast majority of the population. When I recently was called to interview a few high achiever children who had graduated from CARE schools, because CARE offers scholarships for their higher education, and it was incredible the challenges these children have to even if they score the highest marks in their BISC, their biggest bar to going to college is transport is too expensive for them. You know, that they don't have a safe, reliable transportation system to get them to a good college. So it's so basic, the challenges, and you can't even blame them. So sure, CARE is going to step in and help 700 students, which is a huge number, But that's a drop in the ocean. How many thousands of high merit students must have the same challenge who are not getting scholarships?
But then I think towards the end of this podcast, I'd like to ask you that there's thousands of people watching this podcast. So what do you think are the changes that we can bring in the community as some of us privileged, some of us less? What can we do to improve the situation of education within Pakistan?
I think that all of you have a lot of inspiration around you. Like I said, I towards the end of the podcast, I quoted the examples of these organizations. People like Seema Aziz, who heads CARE, people behind Citizens Foundation, ED, etc. These people are examples and models for us of how one person can make such a huge difference. But remember one thing, that, and I'd like to talk about Seema Aziz because I think she's a good sort of case study. She in the early 90s first made herself into a successful businesswoman. She built up an empire that's that made her financially strong, and then what did she do? She dedicated that empire to CARE, and now CARE obviously has a lot of donations, but it is essentially her, with her sort of financial backing, etc., that is giving back to the country and is making such a huge difference since the 90s. So I think that she's a great model and example for all of us to follow, that build yourself into something successful and work hard towards that, and then give to the community. And one thing that she said to me that I hold very dear is that she said, you can't imagine the joy and fulfillment I have in my life because of what I do. And ultimately, why are we all here on this earth? We're here to pass a test given to us by Allah, and to derive contentment and satisfaction. And I can only imagine the contentment and satisfaction she must have knowing how much she's giving back to the community.
I think that's true then. I mean, the best contentment we can have is by helping the people around us and giving back to the society. And what would be a better way to end this podcast than to say that we must help everyone around us, and the community will only be able to strive if we don't think individually, but we think of ourselves as a community, and in that community we try to propagate as much good as we can to the society, so that not only are we successful as a society in this world, but also in the hereafter. Thank you very much, Ms. Attiya, for being with
us. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And that's it from today's Ravi podcast. Have a good day. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you soon.